A Nightmare on Elm Street wasn't just another movie, it was an actual nightmare that haunted the cast, crew, and Hollywood as a whole. Behind Freddy Krueger's burned face and razor glove was a story Hollywood didn't want to tell, a production so desperate it nearly collapsed before filming began, and a darkness inspired by real deaths so inexplicable that even doctors couldn't explain them. The deaths that started it all. Sometime in 1981, Wes Craven was in his Venice studio wearing a bathrobe and a pith helmet, banging away at his computer. He just read something in the Los Angeles Times that wouldn't let him sleep. A family had escaped the killing fields in Cambodia and made it to America. Everything was fine until their young son started having disturbing nightmares. He told his parents he was afraid that if he slept, the thing chasing him would get him. So he tried to stay awake for days at a time. When he finally fell asleep, his parents thought the crisis was over. Then they heard screams in the middle of the night. By the time they got to him, he was dead. He died in the middle of a nightmare. The coroners found nothing. No heart defect, no stroke, no poison. Just a healthy young man who died screaming in his sleep. And he wasn't alone. Craven found 3 other articles about unexplained deaths of refugees from Laos and Cambodia, all dying in their sleep after terrible nightmares. Medical journals would later call it sudden unexplained nocturnal death syndrome. But in 1981, it was just a terrifying mystery. Craven saw a story, a horror film where sleep itself was the weapon, where the monster didn't chase you through dark alleys, it waited for you to close your eyes. Here was a youngster having a vision of a horror that everyone older was denying. That became the spine of everything that followed. But Craven needed more than just fear. He needed a face for the monster, and for that, he reached into his own childhood nightmares. A face at the window. One day, when Wes Craven was a lot younger, a disfigured old man stood outside his window and purposely scared him. The man just stared, waiting for young Wes to notice. Instinctively, Wes ducked out of sight and waited. When he finally looked out again, the old man was still there, still staring. Eventually, the old man just walked away. That scare stayed with Wes for decades, and it evolved into Freddy Krueger, a monster who knew you were watching, wanted you to be afraid, and enjoyed it. Even the name came from Wes's childhood. He had a bully at school called Fred Krueger. Elm Street itself was named after the street that ran past the book depository where Kennedy was shot. To Craven, it was where the innocent world ended. By 1981, Craven had his script, A Nightmare on Elm Street. It was sharp, terrifying, and unlike anything Hollywood had seen. He started pitching it to every major studio, and of course, every single one of them said no. The rejection tour. Disney showed some interest, but they wanted Craven to tone down the violence and make it suitable for younger viewers, a PG-13 family-friendly version. Of course, Craven refused because he wasn't interested in making a sanitized nightmare. Paramount passed because they were already developing Dreamscape, another film about entering people's dreams. They didn't see the need for 2 nightmare movies. Universal Studios rejected it outright. Craven later framed their rejection letter on his office wall. It read, in its December 14, 1982 print, "We have reviewed the script you have submitted. A Nightmare on Elm Street." That was it. Just a cold dismissal. Craven was in desperate personal and financial straits during this period. His career was stalling. The script sat for 3 years gathering dust because Hollywood's gatekeepers had made their decision. Nobody wanted a movie about a dream killer. But there was one man who saw what they didn't. His name was Bob Shea, and he was running a tiny film distribution company called New Line Cinema that was hemorrhaging money and circling bankruptcy. So much for Hollywood dreams. Time to make nightmares by hand. The house that Freddy would build. Bob Shea heard Craven's pitch and thought it was fantastic. "Everybody has nightmares," he said. He got excited, but Craven wouldn't send him the script right away. "Little did I know," Shea later admitted, "everybody else in Hollywood had already passed." You see, New Line Cinema wasn't a production studio. They just distributed other people's films. They had neither the industry clout nor the financial resources to bankroll a feature film. But Shea believed. So he scrambled for financing. 2 investors in England each agreed to contribute 40% and 30% of the production budget. Media Home Entertainment, a home video distributor, pitched in 20%. One of the producers of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre contributed 10%. It was scrappy, desperate, piecemeal financing. And then, 4 weeks before production was supposed to start, disaster struck. The English investor who had promised 40% backed out. Media Home Entertainment rose to the challenge and bridged the gap with additional funding, but the damage was done. The budget was slashed. What started as an adjusted $700,000 budget swelled to over $1 million as production costs mounted. At this point, every dollar mattered, and one mistake could sink the entire company. Shea and Craven had one shot and no room for error. Just 32 days to film a movie that would either save New Line Cinema or destroy it completely. Casting the monster. Finding Freddy Krueger was almost as hard as financing the film. David Warner was originally cast and makeup tests were done, but he had to drop out due to scheduling conflicts. Craven talked with Kane Hodder, who would later play Jason Voorhees. According to Hodder, Wes wasn't sure what kind of person he wanted for the role of Freddy. He was initially thinking of a big guy for the part, and he was also thinking of somebody who had real burn scars. But Hodder wasn't right either. Then Robert Englund walked in. He was starring in the NBC miniseries Fi during its hiatus. The only job that fit his schedule was A Nightmare on Elm Street. That's the real reason he said yes. Driving to the audition, Englund wanted to look as strange and creepy as possible, so he licked his finger and put it in the ashtray of his Datsun Roadster. Ash gives you a nice shadow under the eyes. He dabbed a little there, greased his hair back, and went in. Craven later said, "Robert wasn't as tall as I'd hoped, and he had baby fat on his face, but he impressed me with his willingness to go to the dark places in his mind. Robert understood Freddy." If you're still awake right now, congratulations. That already puts you ahead of the movie's victims. But make sure you subscribe now, just in case you don't make it all the way. For Nancy Thompson, the teenage heroine who would battle Freddy, Craven wanted someone very non-Hollywood. Heather Langenkamp landed the role after an open audition, beating out more than 200 actresses. She was a Stanford student with minimal experience, but was excellent during her audition. And for the role of Nancy's boyfriend Glenn, Johnny Depp auditioned. Director Wes Craven was unsure about casting him when he saw his grungy look in his headshot. But Craven's daughter saw the headshot and said Depp was dreamy. Craven realized he didn't know what teenage girls were into, so he cast Depp in the film. This was Depp's first movie role, and nobody knew his name yet. The monsters were cast, now they just had to survive the set. Boiler rooms, fake blood, and asbestos. Principal photography began on June 11, 1984, and lasted a total of 32 days in and around Los Angeles. The production moved fast, and they had to cut corners wherever possible to stay on budget. The boiler room scenes were filmed in the basement of the Lincoln Heights Jail in Los Angeles. After production wrapped, the jail was condemned due to asbestos. While they were filming, the cast and crew spent weeks breathing in toxic air surrounded by crumbling walls and decay, filming in a building that would soon be deemed too dangerous for human occupancy. Also, over 500 gallons of fake blood were used during filming. The fake blood was made simply by combining water with red food coloring. Cheap, effective, and everywhere. It stained costumes, soaked into floors, splattered across walls. For Tina's iconic death scene, where she's dragged up walls and across the ceiling while invisible Freddy slashes her, the crew built a giant revolving room on axles based on something Craven had seen in a Fred Astaire musical where Astaire dances up walls and across ceilings. The actress, Amanda Weiss, was strapped into the rotating set while the camera stayed fixed. As the room spun, gravity did the work, making it look like she was defying physics. Weiss later admitted she couldn't watch most of the scary scenes when she finally saw the film on VHS. She had to fast forward through them because she didn't have the stomach for it. The iconic bathtub scene where Nancy is attacked by Freddy was accomplished using a specially constructed bathtub that didn't have a bottom. The tub was placed in a bathroom set built on a swimming pool. When Freddy's glove bursts through the water between Nancy's legs, it wasn't CGI or clever editing, it was a real person underwater, timing the moment perfectly. When Robert Englund wore Freddy's glove for the first time, he accidentally cut himself because the blades were real, dulled but real. One wrong move could mean stitches. Dreams that felt like dying. During setup for most of the sleeping scenes, Heather Langenkamp had a habit of actually falling asleep since she didn't have to do anything. Wes Craven used to put things in her nose while she was sleeping. It was playful cruelty, but it kept her on edge, kept her reactions genuine. For the scene where Nancy discovers Bill's body pinned to the door with arrows, Craven wanted authentic terror. So he kept Langenkamp from seeing the completed effect until cameras rolled. When that door swung open and she saw the body, arrows sticking out at odd angles, blood dripping, her scream was pure shock. Craven didn't yell cut. He captured real horror. During the scene when Nancy is running up the stairs away from Freddy, her feet get stuck in a porridge-like substance. Bisquick was used to make the effect of the stairs swallowing Nancy's feet. It was absurd, improvised, and terrifying on screen. The production was chaos held together by duct tape and determination. But when the film was finally assembled, Craven knew they had something special. The question was, would anyone else see it? Opening night gamble. A Nightmare on Elm Street opened on November 9, 1984, playing on just 165 screens on its opening weekend. New Line avoided the crowded Halloween frame and bet on early November instead. It was a calculated risk, less competition, but also less audience awareness. The film cracked the top 10 that weekend. But more importantly, the film grossed $1.27 million from 165 screens, giving it a per-screen average of $7,703, which was the highest among the top 10 films that weekend. People started to spread the word about the film, and theaters added screens. Teenagers dragged their friends. Parents warned their kids not to see it, which only made them want it more. During its first week, it had the highest grossing per-screen average of any film in theaters that week. Against a reported budget of $1.8 million, the film grossed $57 million. New Line Cinema went from the edge of bankruptcy to a legitimate player in Hollywood overnight. Bob Shea later reflected, "But studios have always been built on the backs of horror movies." Freddy Krueger built New Line the same way Frankenstein built Universal. The studio would later earn the nickname "the house that Freddy built." It wasn't a joke. It was literally true. But while Freddy Krueger was making New Line rich, the people who brought him to life weren't seeing the rewards. Robert Englund later admitted, "I didn't make good money on Nightmare until part 3. I eventually got some nice merchandising checks." Amanda West said, "I'm able to buy a nice bottle of wine every now and then with the residuals." The franchise exploded. 8 sequels, a TV series, a crossover with Friday the 13th, a 2010 remake. Freddy became a pop icon, his face on lunchboxes and Halloween costumes. President Ronald Reagan described Democrats' memories as looking like Nightmare on Elm Street in 1988. President George H.W. Bush accused Bill Clinton of running a Freddy Krueger candidacy in 1992. But for some of the people who made it possible, the nightmare wasn't over. It was only the beginning. When the stalker came, Heather Langenkamp kind of blew up overnight. Playing Nancy Thompson in A Nightmare on Elm Street turned her into a total icon. The kind of final girl who didn't just scream and run. She actually fought back and used her brain. Fans loved that. Especially teenage girls, they finally saw someone who wasn't waiting around to be rescued. But not all of that attention was the good kind. After the success of Nightmare, Heather starred in a sitcom called Just the 10 of Us from 1988 to 1990. When it got canceled, one of her fans didn't take it well. Like, really didn't take it well. He started stalking her and even went after her family. It wasn't just some random autograph hunter. This was someone genuinely dangerous. Heather's talked about it since, saying that at the time, it wasn't unusual for celebrities to deal with obsessive fans. But she's also said that description doesn't really capture how scary it was. The phone calls, the letters, feeling like someone was always watching her. Then years later, when Wes Craven came back with Wes Craven's New Nightmare in 1994, he asked her to play herself. Not Nancy, but Heather. And in the movie, Heather is married to a special effects guy, has a son, and is being stalked by someone connected to her role. That wasn't made up for the movie. That was all based on her real life. Wes Craven actually met Heather Langenkamp for lunch while he was working on New Nightmare, and during that conversation, she opened up about some of the scary stuff she'd really been through. By the end of the meeting, Craven basically realized that her real life was more intense than anything in the Elm Street sequels, so he decided to write some of that into the movie. And honestly, that took guts. I mean, imagine taking your own trauma, something that actually happened to you, and turning it into a movie for millions of people to watch. That's a whole different kind of bravery. In New Nightmare, Freddy starts crossing over into the real world and haunting the actress who originally played Nancy. It's this wild, super self-aware idea, meta-horror, before that was even a thing. But for Heather, it wasn't just some clever twist on the franchise. She was basically facing her real fears on camera, using her work to process what had happened to her. Eventually, the stalking stopped, but the experience left a mark. Heather later said that back then it was pretty common for public figures to deal with obsessive fans, and the legal system didn't really do much to protect them, so in a lot of ways, she had to handle that nightmare on her own. The truth about Elm Street. Originally, Freddy Krueger wasn't just a killer, he was written as a child molester. But at the time, there were several real-life abuse cases happening around California, and Wes Craven didn't want the movie to feel like it was exploiting something that raw. So he changed it. Freddy became a child molester instead. Still horrifying, but more symbolic, the idea was to tap into those deep, primal fears, not headline news. When the 2010 remake came along, they actually brought that part of the original script back. Jackie Earle Haley's version of Freddy was once again a child molester. It was meant as a nod to Craven's first vision, but critics weren't thrilled. Most people felt it went a little too far, proving that sometimes what you don't show is way scarier than what you do. Robert Englund, who played the original Freddy, also added his own touch. He's the one who pushed for Freddy to wear a fedora instead of the paperboy cap in the script. He said he liked how he could use the hat with lighting and shadows, dip it down to hide his eyes, or take it off dramatically to reveal the burns. That one little detail ended up becoming one of the most iconic looks in horror history. And just for fun, you know that famous kiki-ki ma-ma-ma sound from Friday the 13th? Totally different movie, but it shows how creative these low-budget horror teams were. Composer Harry Manfredini made that sound by whispering Kai from Kill and Ma from Mommy into a mic, and then running it through echo effects. Simple, creepy, and unforgettable. And honestly, A Nightmare on Elm Street should never have worked. Every major studio turned it down, the financing almost collapsed, and they had to film parts of it in a condemned jail. The cast was mostly unknowns, and the budget was tiny. By all logic, it should have flopped, but instead, it became one of the most influential horror movies ever made. But instead of failing, A Nightmare on Elm Street blew up. It completely changed horror. Suddenly, this burned guy with a glove full of blades wasn't just a movie monster, he was a pop culture icon. The movie put New Line Cinema on the map, kicked off Johnny Depp's career, and gave an entire generation a brand new reason to be scared of falling asleep. For the people who made it, though, the success came with a price. They dealt with rough working conditions, breathing in asbestos dust, getting scratched by real blades, filming inside spinning rooms and bathtub sets that were way less safe than they looked. And later, some of them faced stalkers, stress, and the weird emotional fallout that comes from creating something that never really goes away. In a way, the nightmare didn't totally end for them. It just changed shape. They thought they were making a low-budget slasher about a dream killer. They had no idea they were creating a franchise that would haunt Hollywood for 40 years, a character that would become more famous than most of the actors who played against him, and a legacy built on real fear, real trauma, and real deaths that doctors still can't fully explain. Freddy Krueger never dies. He just waits for you to close your eyes. If you enjoyed learning the dark truth about Freddy, you're not going to believe what happened behind the scenes of Scarface, where the horror wasn't just on camera. Click now to discover how a movie that almost didn't happen ended up becoming a real-life nightmare for everyone involved. So, who were you with the first time you saw Nightmare on Elm Street? Let me know in the comments below and stick around for the most searched horror on the internet today.
Wow, that was weird.